Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Watching Our Waste, presented by Samantha Kenny. Samantha is World Wildlife Fund's Program Officer for Food Waste. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today, Samantha. I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Kendall. I'm really glad to be here. So hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be speaking with you today. And thanks so much to Natural Habitat Adventures for having me on. My name is Samantha Kenny, and I've worked on the World Wildlife Fund food waste team based out of Washington, D.C. for almost 4 years now. My team is multifunctional. We work across the global food system from farm to fork. I spend most of my time focused on preventing and managing food waste in tourism and food service sectors, including in hotels, restaurants, cruises, commercial food service. I also spend time coordinating the WWF global network of offices and staff more broadly on food loss and waste strategy. So I'm guessing that if you're joining this great series of Nat Hab webinars, that many of you are already familiar with World Wildlife Fund. But to put it into context, WWF is an international conservation organization that works with companies and communities to address pressing environmental needs of people and nature. You may be familiar at least with our panda logo or our work with wildlife and ecosystems around the world, but it might be less intuitive why WWF works on food systems and specifically on topics like addressing food waste in hotels. So WWF as a global organization works across these 6 pillars you see here. We call them goal teams. Some of them are no-brainers like wildlife and oceans. Those are the things we're most known for. And food is among the newer of our goal teams, and it includes bodies of work focused on increasing the sustainability of global food production, eliminating food loss and waste across value chains, and promoting sustainable consumption of food. The food program was added to WWF's portfolio once it became clear how large an impact food production and consumption have on people and the landscapes where we do our work. In fact, food production is one of the biggest threats to life on the planet. When you consider the habitat conversion and resources that go into producing food, the logistics and processing chain used to move food towards consumers, and the huge web of distributors and outlets selling and serving food to the public, the food system is central to all of our lives, and it's more clear than ever that food is an economic and societal keystone. Producing and consuming it accounts for the single largest sink of resources of any global system, and it has hidden and compounding impacts in the world's most fragile places, including the beautiful places that we visit on vacation and that Natural Habitat Adventures covers with their portfolio. Sorry if there's a bit of a lag. Just let me or Kendall know if you're not seeing the screen. So 70% of biodiversity loss is due to agriculture. You can see here a photo of a wild orangutan traveling on a road cleared for the purpose of transporting the palm harvest. Another example that comes to mind is the conversion of vast swaths of the Amazon rainforest for farming and ranching. But a heartbreaking example can be seen closer to many of our homes in the US. The Great Plains in North America loses more wildland to agriculture every year than the Brazilian rainforest does. So 70% of biodiversity loss is due to agriculture, but how much biodiversity are we losing? In 2016, WWF reported a 60% decrease in populations of mammals, birds, amphibians, fish, and other vertebrates since 1970 due to drivers like deforestation and overfishing. You can see the outsized impact that food production has on our freshwater stores, GHG emissions that force climate, and chemical use. And we're quickly exploiting our fisheries and the topsoil resources we'll need to sustainably produce food into the future for our global food system. And all of those stats are made even crazier when we understand that even after investing all of that land, energy, chemicals, fresh water in the production of food, 1/3 of what we grow ends up uneaten, which is obviously a huge waste, but also a huge opportunity. If we can find ways to rescue that food or keep it in the supply chain, think of the people we can feed and how much more resilient our food system can be, especially when we're looking at uncertain circumstances such as the ones presented now by COVID-19. So understanding the impact of food production and the scope of the food waste problem, how do we begin to address it? So there's a group called REFED, and that name is short for Rethink Food Waste Through Economics and Data. In 2016, they put out a foundational report inventorying drivers of food waste in the US. This report found that about 16% of wasted food was lost at the farm level, and that's about 10 million tons of food. They found 2% of food was lost in processing, and then a staggering 40% was observed to be wasted in consumer-facing businesses like restaurants, hotels, and grocery stores. The study found the remaining 43% wasted in households. So this report here was the genesis of the WWF Food Waste Program in the US, as it helped us designate our strategic work streams. And WWF US works well with businesses and governments, so we looked to those aspects of the problem to see where we could fit in. And we left the topic of household food waste in the US to be addressed by a great existing initiative run by the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, and that campaign is called Save the Food. But outside of the US, the global WWF network does operate a campaign for the public on household food waste, and that's called Save 1/3, and it has some great tips and resources as well. So I encourage you to visit both of those campaign websites, Save the Food and Save 1/3, to check out their work if you're interested in learning more about household food waste and how to address food waste you might be creating in your home. But on the global scale, we're motivated by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, specifically to address food waste. SDG 12 focuses on ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns, and Target 3 of that goal specifically calls out food waste, and that reads, by 2030, we'll have per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels and reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. And there's a multifunctional global working group called Champions 12.3 that's dedicated to achieving this target on food loss and waste and coordinating the different stakeholders involved. But specifically, as the WWF US Food Waste team, we saw ourselves best positioned to address food loss and waste across the 5 sectors that you see here on the screen. I lead our work with hospitality, tourism, restaurants, and food service, which I'll spend some time diving deeper into today. But I work with colleagues on the food waste team here in WWF US that focus on addressing food loss and waste in grocery stores, on farms, and also in schools. So our engagement with grocery stores right now in the US focuses around a voluntary agreement of cities along the Pacific Coast to fight food waste, and that group is called the Pacific Coast Collaborative. Their members will soon be testing a brand new industry toolkit that my colleagues have developed on strategic solutions to food waste in grocery stores. We have a really great report series focusing in on post-harvest loss or food loss at the farm level called No Food Left Behind. And the most recent report in that series examines how we can use gig economy workers to harvest crops in the US. And you can find all 3 reports in that series by Googling No Food Left Behind, and they're also posted on the worldwildlife.org website. And we have a curriculum and set of resources geared for middle and high school students in the US to learn about food waste and its connection to nature and wildlife. Those resources include guides on conducting school cafeteria food waste audits and analyzing collected data through an online platform database that holds information from hundreds of cafeteria food waste audits that have been conducted in the last year. And you can find more about that program if you search for Food Waste Warriors WWF. It's also posted on our worldwildlife.org website. And there's a full curriculum with lots of activities that could be used with students in schools to learn more about this topic. And while I'm not directly involved in the day-to-day for those programs I just mentioned, I'm really happy to direct any questions you have to my colleagues who work on this to offer more detail as a follow-up. And I'll share my email at the end of my slide deck today. So each of our programs favor the prevention of food waste over any management strategy. Prevention at the source secures the most benefit for all of our systems, and it's in line with the US EPA guidance that you see here on the slide. If food waste cannot be prevented, it should be recovered whenever possible to feed people. In the US, food donations are often coordinated through the huge network of food banks organized by Feeding America. If recovery to feed people isn't possible, there are several examples of successful repurposing of unused food to feed animals. And if those options aren't available, then we start thinking about disposal strategies. So industrial uses and composting you see here listed in the middle of the pyramid include food waste disposal options like recycling used cooking oil to make biofuel, creating compost to use when you're growing crops, or using a system called anaerobic digestion, which processes organic waste to produce energy. The absolute least preferred method of disposing food waste is in a landfill or in an incinerator. You know, food is always food. It can feed people or animals, or its nutrients can be used to grow more food. It's such a waste to just burn it up or bury it in a hole, since it always really has a role to play. It takes a lot of energy to burn food in an incinerator because food is a wet item. And burying food in a landfill is likely worst of all, because food in a landfill, since it's sealed in without oxygen, breaks down to methane gas. If you take a look at a landfill you're driving past, you just safely take a peek, you'll see pipes sticking up out of the landfill mound. And those are used to off-gas methane that's building up as organic material breaks down beneath the surface. And methane is quite a potent greenhouse gas, stronger but less persistent and long-lived than carbon dioxide. So landfills can have a large impact on global climate, as well as the public health of the local communities that surround them. So with all of those considerations in mind, my team set out 4 years ago to first engage the hotel sector. We thought of hotels first because we saw them as employing a critical mass of food service workers and serving a critical mass of the public. We boiled down the EPA inverted pyramid structure you saw in the last slide into this strategy here. Prevent whatever food waste you can to secure the maximum benefit for your business, your community, and the planet. Donate what you can't prevent, and keep anything left over out of landfills. All of these efforts are underpinned by separation and measurement, because we found it near impossible to justify any initiative to fight food waste when it's an invisible problem in an operation or even in a home. The first step is to separate food from all other waste streams and begin measuring it, whether it's by weight, volume, or dollars, really any metric to help you understand the scope and scale of the food waste being produced. So in 2016, we had been working for some time with Hilton Worldwide on the topic of food waste for a few months already. It was through that relationship that we began working with the American Hotel and Lodging Association's food and beverage and sustainability committees to see where we were best positioned to help the sector on this topic. We convened a pre-competitive working group where we developed a pilot engagement plan to measure waste, create data baselines, and test solutions to food waste. We conducted 10 pilots with hotel properties around the US, some of them just testing separation and tracking behaviors. Some added staff training in the form of a video training series my team developed with the Lobster Inc. hospitality training platform. And one property conducted event-level food waste audits that uncovered strategic ways for them to cut down on their waste. These interventions accomplished between 17 and 38% reductions compared to those properties' data baselines. And those findings laid the foundation for my team to develop comprehensive guidance and tools for hotels to prevent and manage their food waste. So we developed and published the toolkit you see on the left called Fighting Food Waste in Hotels, and the accompanying hotelkitchen.org website you see on the right. We published those in November 2017. The print toolkit follows the flow of food in a hotel. It's also available as a PDF on the resources page on that hotelkitchen.org website. So that flow of food in the hotel is really a chronological examination of where food is lost through their value system. But starting from menu planning, through procurement, receiving the food, storing the food, and preparing and serving meals, as well as we examined ways to manage surplus food through food donation programs or food waste diversion strategies, so keeping food out of landfills or incinerators. The hotelkitchen.org website can be navigated chronologically in the same way through that flow of food, or the content can be navigated by staff functions. So for example, if you're a chef or a server or the general manager of a hotel, each of you could come and click on one of these colored squares you see on the home page to find role-specific information on how you can address food waste within your function. The website also houses a link to access our free video training course. It holds materials in several other languages that we've used to scale this program and guidance around the globe to key sectors. It holds guidance on serving an efficient buffet, perhaps a less relevant resource now in COVID and post-COVID operations. And it also holds our newest resource you see on the right, which is a 16-week champion's guide offering a step-by-step approach to diagnosing a hotel's food waste problem and identifying strategic ways to address it. And that resource is just 8 pages long with numbered lists on how to think about food waste in a hotel operation, so much distilled from the comprehensive content in the full toolkit and on the website. So now I'd love to take a break and show you a brief video that introduces our video training series. It's a short promotional video that's publicly available on YouTube, and we've used it to introduce hotel staff teams to our video training resource, which in full is about 30 minutes of video content and 30 minutes of facilitated classroom content for a trainer or facilitator. But this is just a few minutes to introduce that training series. So I'm going to attempt to show you now. All right, I'm going to move back to the presentation now. And hopefully you can see it. Kendall, give me a shout if not. So thanks for taking a look at that. We received lots of positive feedback on that video training series, which is now available in spoken or subtitled English, Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese, Greek, and Chinese, which somewhat maps to some of the more mature programs that have scaled the hotel kitchen guidance and resources since we began. I can't emphasize enough the importance of staff buy-in to achieving food waste goals in a hotel. Properties are such complex systems that it really takes a culture shift to make the change. So before diving a little deeper, I want to speak at a high level about what a hotel gains by adopting a food waste prevention and management initiative. So we understand the scope of the food waste problem and the consumer-facing businesses that are driving a large portion of it. But why would a business see benefit in addressing this issue in their operations? So as you can imagine, COVID has had a really outsized impact on this sector. We've seen a huge disruption, almost a full stop to hotel operations, and a drastic impact on the day-to-day of almost every restaurant. So food and making the most of the food purchased can play a vital role in the viability of these businesses right now and into the future. Food service is operating on even thinner margins than ever, with a less stable workforce, less consistent business volumes, and a lot of risk from lots of different directions. We see the benefits of addressing food waste as fourfold under current circumstances, under business as usual circumstances, and only amplified by the changing context that we're seeing in these sectors in light of COVID. On the personnel side, we've seen this work motivate and energize staff teams, and we even see that work on this initiative can improve employee retention and morale. So culinary teams are the physical and creative driver of this initiative, and wasted food can also be a waste of their time and talent. These individuals are also often members of their surrounding community and can have deep and personal connections to local food and security, and that makes them fantastic partners for launching and leading this work. There are major benefits for the planet, the local and global environment, as we explored earlier. So these efforts can really help companies strategically achieve their stated brand or property, environmental or social goals. And there's also PR and marketing benefits for these sectors, tapping into sustainability as an increasingly popular trend for travelers and diners, and a really positive story to share with the world. Let's start where the money is. So a year or so ago, these two reports pictured here were published by Champions 12.3, which is that multifunctional group I mentioned earlier, working to achieve UN SDG Target 12.3. These two business cases represent comprehensive studies they undertook with hotel and restaurant sectors to measure the financial benefits of addressing food waste. Now, these were two separate, distinct studies with global hotel and restaurant sectors. It's just convenient for me that they coincidentally found the exact same return on investment for both sectors, and they each measured a 7-to-1 return on investment for hotels and restaurants working to address food waste, which is quite a large return in respect to other operational shifts a property might choose to take, especially shifts they might make in the name of sustainability. And beyond the balance sheet, we also see strong trends for workforce retention when a business is committed to social or environmental goals. And I'll read through these for us. So a report showed that 64% of millennials consider a company's social and environmental commitments when deciding where to work. And 64% of the workforce reports that they wouldn't take a job if the company doesn't have a strong corporate responsibility program. 83% report that they would be more loyal to a company that helps them contribute to social and environmental issues, and 88% say their job is more fulfilling when they are provided opportunities to make a positive impact on social and environmental topics. But just how effective is this type of program at engaging staff in a hotel? Well, we distributed surveys to staff at our pilot properties before and after the project. We asked specifically on whether they agreed that effective food waste prevention strategies were in place at their hotel, that they had clearly defined roles and responsibilities as it related to food waste, and that they were aware of waste prevention activities at their properties. And we were happy to see pretty significant increases on each of these questions at the end of the pilots compared to what we measured at the beginning. These raw numbers might look sterile, but this data comes along with some really compelling and special stories about staff members and teams who really internalize the culture that values food. And I could spend a long time highlighting case studies and stories, and I encourage you to take a look at the case studies currently posted on hotelkitchen.org, and also to note that those case studies will be updated in the coming weeks to include cases from our global hotel pilots that we've been conducting for the last few years in key sectors around the world. But right now, I'd like to chat through one of my favorite stories from our pilot program and a property we worked with on the West Coast of the US. So this property was one of our original 10 pilots, and using separation and measurement, that property was able to determine several key drivers of food waste that they could really control just by adjusting their menu. One of those often wasted dishes was bread and butter that they offered for free to every table as a matter of tradition. So a free bread and butter basket on the table. This bread and butter contributed a huge volume to that property's daily waste. And they saw that they measured that almost half of the bread that they baked in-house daily was actually going uneaten. Now, this property employed a full-time bread baker, and he had worked for the property for over a decade and would come in before dawn each day to start baking this bread. So the property decided to try something out and put the bread and butter on their menu for $2, which they saw as an amount that would be an easy choice for those who would enjoy the bread, but would prevent any waste from a table that wasn't interested in it. And through that small change, the property measured that they saved 90 pounds of dough and 65 pounds of butter per month, which equated to a few $1,000s over the course of the year. And on top of that, the baker mentioned that he felt such pride that the item he made every day was now valued on the restaurant's menu instead of ending up in the hotel's trash. On the external front, sustainability is a growing trend in travel and tourism worldwide. So leisure travelers, as well as corporate meeting and events planners, seek destinations and venues that offer robust environmental or sustainability packages and programming. So it seems the industry is catching up with you folks who are already enjoying your adventures with Nat Hab. A survey we saw by Exodus Travel showed that 78% of respondents consider themselves to be more ethically conscious travelers than they'd previously been. And an IACC survey of meeting planners from 5 continents voted ethical operations and sustainable practice as the second most important element for meeting venues to address in the next 5 years. This gives hotels a great incentive to conduct this work and also a platform to talk about it and influence other businesses to join in. A recent report by WRAP just in the last few weeks, and WRAP is the Waste and Resources Action Program, which operates out of the UK and is a leader on the topic of food waste. They showed an increased attention of the public and consumers on the topic of food waste, and that individuals are placing a higher value on food since the pandemic has spread. Now, instead of reiterating the impacts of food production and food waste on the environment that I mentioned earlier, I thought I'd show you how separating and measuring food waste can provide really influential data that can guide strategic plans to cut down on waste and manage any food, any surplus food in a way that yields the most benefit for people and for the planet. So with one of my team members a few years ago, I conducted a one-time lunch audit of an 800-person event at one of our pilot properties. And goals for that audit included quantifying how much food waste was created at this type of event and developing a deeper understanding of the drivers of excess food at an event buffet. The kitchen and banquet staff were aware of this audit. We actually requested it be kept relatively secret in order to get the most accurate picture of what was going on, but the staff team was told we were coming and took particular care not to prepare excess food or overset this buffet. They actually even closed an entire buffet line or a full buffet table that they would have set if we weren't there measuring their waste that day. And even with those precautions, we measured that 45% of the food that was prepared for that lunch wasn't eaten. Of that uneaten 45%, almost 60% of it was recoverable, which means it was kept at temperature in the back of house and was safe to be donated or reused on the property for events or in employee dining. 24% was food wasted on a guest's plate and therefore must be disposed. And the rest of the waste was what was left over on the buffet, and that's no longer considered food safe since people had access to it, and that is also a waste stream that has to be discarded. We explored why this level of overproduction happened, and we found that 32% of the food prepared for guests, it was prepared for guests that said they'd show up but then didn't. So these no-shows are often thought to be the key driver of overproduction at this type of event. But what we found was actually that the majority of overproduced food, almost 70% of it, was purposefully prepared for the attending guests, but it still went uneaten. And that was mostly due to exaggerated portion sizes and possibly an inaccurate understanding of guest preferences and behaviors at this event. So what the guests might want to eat and when they would be hungry. So for the first time, this property had numeric data representing the efficiency of their event buffet, and they could see just how much food they were overproducing and what specific items were going uneaten. So armed with that insight, the chef made strategic menu and service changes to maximize the efficiency of their food service. And this was the property I mentioned earlier that actually achieved that 38% reduction in food waste compared to their baseline. But how difficult is it for a property to gather such useful data? Well, it can be time intensive, but it's not that difficult at all. There are a number of options for hotels to track food waste, including hardware and software solutions that automate the process, makes it very easy on staff. And even though those solutions require some monthly investment, the return on that investment is significant. But the beginnings of such an initiative can start with very little upfront investment. The most important thing is just for a hotel to begin separating their food from other waste streams so it's not mixed in with other materials. And so staff and management can easily see what food and how much food is being thrown away. And then tracking it quantifiably by weight or volume can begin mapping food waste generation to trends like business volume. Depending on how granularly a property tracks where, when, and what food is wasted, the more strategic their plans can be to reduce it. So it really just requires a little data and a lot of thought and attention, but luckily this becomes second nature once new behaviors are adopted. And this process of measuring and categorizing waste has applications outside of such large food service as an 800-person buffet. If you're interested in cutting down on food waste at home, the best thing you can do is track what types of food you're wasting, how much of it, and why. Keeping a little food waste diary, even for a short time like a week, sort of like a Weight Watchers program, once you have that measurement and insight into what you're wasting, you can begin to control it, and you'd be surprised by how much you can cut down. So that is an overview, a quick overview of the WWF Food Waste Program in the US and a little bit of a deep dive into our work engaging hotels. So I'd like to chat a little bit about the geographic development and reach of the WWF Food Loss and Waste Program, which has spread to countries around the world. The Rockefeller Foundation funded the work to develop Hotel Kitchen that I've been mentioning. And after that platform was published in 2017, they issued us a second grant to scale Hotel Kitchen guidance and resources to key hospitality and tourism sectors around the globe. And that requires more than finding a good contact and translating the resources. Food systems are really different depending on where you are, whether that's due to local ingredients and diets, infrastructure for food waste diversion from landfills, policy enabling food donation, and so many other factors. So the intention was for us to leverage our global network of WWF offices and staff, which you can see mapped here, to scale thoughtful engagement of the global hotel sector first, with resources and materials appropriately adapted for use in those communities. I'm hoping that showing the growth of this program geographically will help make connections to some of your travels and perhaps the work you do. So here in dark blue, you can see the countries with a WWF network office operating, and the light blue shaded countries have another organization that we're closely affiliated with and with which we coordinate on our conservation work in the region. So WWF has about 100 offices globally. The food waste program I've described, including our work on Hotel Kitchen, started in the US office with our team based in Washington, DC, though it was not the first time WWF has thought and worked on the topic of food waste. Early in program development, my team led 2 regional cohorts to adopt Hotel Kitchen guidance and resources through consultant leadership in Portland, Oregon, and Baltimore, Maryland. And then last year, we were funded by the American Hotel and Lodging Foundation to see larger engagements on the topic of fighting food waste in hotels and the Hotel Kitchen platform in Denver, Colorado, Dallas, Texas, and in South Florida. And those engagements continue today as we navigate COVID and continue to support those communities. When we were directed by Rockefeller to scale engagement with hotels on food waste globally at the end of 2017, we first learned about other WWF programs that addressed food waste in hotels that were already active under different bodies of work in the WWF network. And you can see those highlighted here in light green. We learned a lot from the experiences of those offices and their leadership, and we remain deeply connected to their teams strategically to coordinate our global work on food loss and waste. Then, over the last 3 years, we worked to build capacity and conduct pilots with hotels in all of the countries you see here colored in blue. In Eastern Europe, our team operating as WWF Adria led pilots in both Croatia and Serbia, which is why you see it highlighted there as a region. And some of the countries you see here have hired permanent staff to focus on food loss and waste, while others of these teams are just getting started. We report against this multi-year scaling effort to Rockefeller in 2021, so several of these efforts are still active. And then earlier this year, the WWF Global Food Practice, which oversees the entire WWF network's work on food, launched an effort to develop coordinated strategies on food loss and waste across our network. We've been working with a global cohort of WWF staff. You can see their territories highlighted now in dark green, to develop strategy content that is specific to their country or region, and we're in the process of finalizing those strategies later this summer for the purpose of coordinated projects and fundraising. These strategies transcend just food waste in hotels. They follow a full farm-to-fork view that addresses food loss and waste across the global supply chain. And finally, I want to highlight that there are many other regions and organizations, just a couple I've highlighted here, doing really great work to address food loss and waste. WRAP, the organization I mentioned earlier, based out of the UK, is of particular note, coordinating voluntary agreement efforts in key areas globally. And I wanted to mention that WWF has MOUs or other relationships with groups operating on the topic of food waste around the globe. And while it's a large and diverse group of stakeholders, I like to think we're quite good at collaborating and finding collective ways to make impact, especially since we're lucky enough to be coordinated by the Champions 12.3 group on a global scale. Now, before I wrap up, I wanted to speak briefly on a more recent effort we've undertaken. Inspired by Hotel Kitchen, my team partnered with the National Restaurant Association last year to develop a complementary resource specific to the U.S. restaurant sector called 86 Food Waste. Now, this is a new platform just for restaurants of different types, and while the key tenets of addressing food waste are consistent with Hotel Kitchen, the language and framing of this report and website are more approachable and appropriate for the restaurant sector. We were lucky enough to be able to develop another staff training video for this platform and learn to make the whole thing a bit quicker than our half-hour Hotel Kitchen series. and hopefully a little bit more attention grabbing to get our message across. So it's just a single quick video. It's about 6 minutes long, and you can find it by going to 86foodwaste.com and clicking the link Watch Video under Employee Engagement. You can also find, and it'll take you to a YouTube link. And I'd love for you to take a look at it. I laugh every time, and it would be great for you to see it because, in fact, we're really proud of how it turned out, as well as we're proud of how this whole platform, 86 Food Waste, turned out. But unfortunately, they were published just in March of this year. So the exact time we planned to market and amplify those materials, the attention of the industry and the whole world was grabbed by the coronavirus pandemic. So you would be among some of the early viewers of that video. And I'll take this last slide to speak a little bit more about COVID-19 and what it means when we look at the coming months and years of combating food waste in consumer-facing businesses. And please don't try and read all of the small text on this page. These are just some visuals to help me benchmark this work. So as I mentioned before, the pandemic has a really outsized impact on hotel and restaurant sectors. And we're focused in this moment on supporting these sectors through closures and reopenings and potentially closures again, with a huge amount of respect to the ways that responsibilities and priorities have shifted, perhaps permanently, in the last few months. With that said, we're also very aware of the importance of food during this time. I think all of us have a bit of a better understanding of the ways each of us interact with food systems, between shortages on grocery store shelves, long lines at food pantries, and the stop-and-go nature of businesses at local restaurants. The U.S. and global food systems are well-oiled machines that are supremely efficient when operating as usual, but right now we see food stuck in the food system all over the world. Where there's less demand on commercial food service, there is much more demand at grocery stores and food pantries, and food that is grown and sold for businesses can't easily be rerouted to the public or to a donation program. So how do we keep even more food from being wasted, especially in a context where an increasing number of people are food insecure, including people that were comfortably employed, including in businesses like the hotels and restaurants that we engage until very recently. So my team is working on two efforts in parallel to help mend aspects of the food system, particularly floored by COVID. And these are complex disruptions, so these just address a small portion that we're well positioned to speak on. The first you'll see on the left, and again, sorry for the small text, please don't try and read it. I'm happy to share more information via email. It's a survey designed to inventory private sector assets that are currently not being used and could be put to use to help food banks or community feeding programs. These food access organizations are short on space and personnel to meet the growing demand at their facilities, while hotels have excess space and furloughed personnel that are well trained in safe food handling. So this effort seeks to inventory personnel that may be able to be called back to work. For this purpose, it also works to inventory food storage space, including cold and freezer storage in hotels and other businesses, to see if those spaces and resources can be rented to support local food banks or community feeding programs. And this survey has just been released for responses this week. So please reach out via email. I'm happy to share a link, more information if you're interested to hear more, or if you have a network or contacts that might be interested to learn about that. And I'll mention also that effort is focusing in on New York City, North Carolina, and Georgia to beta test the work with the hope of expanding through the U.S. sector in the near future. And we're also working to develop revised operational guidance for hotels, restaurants, and other food service operations to establish or reestablish efficient operations in light of new contexts posed by the pandemic. It's the resources pictured on the right. That is, I think you are the first group to lay eyes on it. It's probably not in its final form, but it focuses on why it's particularly important to understand food waste during the pandemic to prevent bulk amounts of food from being wasted in the event of unanticipated closures, to see food waste as a financial and marketing opportunity, which could really be a make it or break it consideration for small businesses that are struggling to stay above water right now. This resource is being developed and pushed out by a non-competitive working group, including myself, Refed, Sodexo, LeanPath Food Waste Tracking Software, and representatives from James Beard Foundation and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And we plan to have a webinar on that topic hosted by Refed in the next couple weeks if you're interested to hear more about that. So in short, we're thinking seriously about the role that food plays in consumer-facing businesses in the new vision of the future, which is a future that is more aware and sensitive to food system disruptions, and one that is more focused than ever on positive contributions. Eliminating waste from our systems is more pertinent than ever, and the benefits a business can see from this work are more integral now than they've ever been. So with that, I hope you found this to be an interesting lens through which to view the global food system and its impacts, and a peek behind the curtains into just one aspect of hotel and tourism operations that make our experiences extra special and also tie in really closely with social and environmental topics. If I mentioned a body of work or geography that you're interested to learn more about, even if it's not my specialty, please feel welcome to reach out. My email is listed there on the slide. You can also see links to the Hotel Kitchen and 86 food waste platforms, or URLs rather, that you can lift to take a closer look. But through all, I'm more than happy to connect you with one of my colleagues or add additional context to any piece, however I can. So with that, I'll wrap and send my thanks and best wishes to everyone on the line today and to the team at Natural Habitat Adventures for hosting us. And thank you for your time and interest, and I'm happy to take any questions now or in follow-up.
Great, thank you so much, Samantha. That was absolutely fascinating. We do have several questions for you. First, I'd like to remind folks watching that if you do have a question, you can submit that in the questions field in your control panel. All right, one popular question is, do you have any resources for families or just people to reduce food waste at home?
Yeah, definitely. So I would suggest checking out Natural Resource Defense Council's website called Save the Food. They have some really great resources, including they call a guesstimator, which helps you estimate how much food you should be purchasing for your family or for a small dinner or lunch you might be hosting at home. They also have tons of recipes for how to reuse frequently wasted food scraps. You can also just search food scrap recipes. There's a lot of really fun ways to make use of food that you might have not thought was edible or delicious. And I'll also mention that WWF has their global Save 1/3 campaign. And if you just Google that, there's additional information and resources for families thinking about household food waste. But at the top level, I would say make a list before you go to the grocery store. A lot of the things wasted are impulse buys. You can freeze almost any food, and the internet has really great tips on how to store food, whether it's on your countertop, in a refrigerator, what temperature to keep your refrigerator and freezer at to maintain quality. So there's lots of great information if you shoot that into Google.
Great. And is there a way that someone can tell whether the restaurant or hotel they're visiting is combating food waste?
Sure. So I definitely encourage you to have a conversation with your server if you are at a hotel or restaurant. Even if they don't have an answer at their fingertips, it would be a really great opportunity for them to chat with a manager, for all of you to learn together. Many restaurants and hotels that have this as a priority will list it on their website under their other sustainability communications. And we hope to continue, we're definitely dedicated to representing more hotels that are focusing on this on our case studies page on hotelkitchen.org, as well as working with some of the more well-known certification bodies to include food waste and sustainability certifications for these types of businesses. But I think the best thing to do is just start by having a conversation, and the more times you ask, the more likely they are to be prepared with an answer and to drive that change forward in their businesses as well.
Great. Do landfills ever link off-gassing pipes so that the methane can be collected and burned to generate electricity?
This is an awesome question, and whoever asks it and anyone interested, I definitely encourage you to spend some time on YouTube learning more about energy production, recapture of energy, and recapture of methane from landfills. It is definitely a technology that exists and is in use, not quite at scale, but it's definitely something that's really promising, and a lot of governments around the world are looking into scaling that type of work. But there's a few ways that food waste can be used for energy that are a little more efficient. Definitely, we see the best benefits for reducing energy use and greenhouse gas emissions just by keeping food out of a landfill or keeping it out of any disposal option, eating it, using it for its intended purpose. but also things like anaerobic digestion are a really efficient way. And actually, food is really great feedstock for something like an anaerobic digester. And it can be very, very productive. So there's a lot of even existing efforts with the US EPA right now. They're releasing a large bucket of money to increase infrastructure in that area to make sure we're capturing what resources we do have and putting it towards domestic energy production. But I'm not an expert, so I would definitely encourage you to take a closer look because it's really, really interesting.
Awesome. Are there additional considerations needed for reducing food waste on cruise ships?
Absolutely. So it's a very interesting question and one that my team has been examining very closely in recent months. I was actually on one of the very last cruise ships to sail before the industry shut down, largely shut down in March. So I spent a lot of time at home immediately following that voyage, but learned a lot about cruise ship operations, and it's definitely a different beast from hotels or restaurant food service. The closed system, a lot of their food is included in the cost of the vacation. So it's a really interesting context, and I'll definitely mention that there are several cruise companies that are really thinking about food waste management in their operations, how they could even make that fun and engaging as a topic for their staff and their guests. I would take a particular look at Costa Cruise Lines, COSTA, and they have just one of the most successful corporate food waste programs. They've achieved huge reductions. And I think where it will go next, it remains to be seen. I think we're going to see a lot of shifts in food service. We're going to see buffets served in very different ways. So we'll be really interested to jump back in with the sector once we have a little more bandwidth and operations are a little bit more predictable.
Great. And someone watching got a question from a friend this morning. What is the environmental impact of garbage disposals, like in your sink, versus throwing out food? She told her that compost is best, but what's the impact of using a garbage disposal versus just trashing it?
This is a really, really good question, because you have that moment where you're about to throw something away and you have these two options, right? You've got a trash, you've got a garbage disposal in your sink, maybe you've got a compost bin. Of course, that's really great if you do. So what's really different, and I'll mention first that I'm a nerd about this kind of thing, so forgive me, but it really does depend on your local municipal system. So your waste will be taken by a waste hauler, municipal or commercial waste hauler, to a landfill or another waste management facility near your community. I live in Washington, D.C. Our waste is taken to Northern Virginia and processed there. When you grind something in your sink, it is flushed to your community's wastewater treatment plant. So what it actually means is that waste disposed in those two different ways end up in completely different places. And depending on your community's infrastructure, one of them is likely more efficient than the other at processing that waste. I'm not an expert on this topic. I can hypothesize that it is a little less intensive to manage the waste at a wastewater treatment plant. It's not emitting methane in the same way. But I do know that at a wastewater treatment plant, it is a very complex, sophisticated process to process water into something clean to be released. And they do also create they pull out all of that nutrients and they end up managing it through compost or landfill again. So it might just be an extra step to get to a landfill. But I find I make the decision by whatever's easiest. If I can shake it out into my compost bin, I do that as much as possible. If I can't, I'll be very easy on my in-sink garbage disposal. But being kind to your sink and being kind to your wastewater treatment plant, and really eating all the food you can, eating all the food you purchased is really the best option for where that food should go.
Great. And when you're referring to food production, are you including food grown for livestock as well?
Yes, I am. So most food is grown for livestock, and food loss in animal feed supply chains is another really very important and significant cause of waste to zero in on. And it's very unique depending on where in the world these livestock operations are happening. But just given the intensity of raising livestock, it's definitely important to take a look at feed, to take a look at feed systems and how they can be made more efficient and more less intensive on natural resources. And I'll also mention that there is a body of work that some companies are undertaking now to take food waste. And I mentioned you can redirect food waste if you've carefully separated it and managed it to be eaten by animals. There's a lot of operations, actually historically, of course, when we were raising livestock through history, we were feeding them table scraps, food scraps, crops that weren't going to be eaten by people. So that's definitely an active system and an active destination. But there's also some solutions right now that are looking at processing types of food waste into animal pellets and animal feed. And that also shows some benefits for reduced greenhouse gas emissions, even as animals are processing that feed. They tend to have a harder time maybe processing some other more commercial sources of food. So yes, it's definitely something to take a look at. I would encourage you, if you're interested on supply chain, farm level and supply chain food loss, to take a look at the No Food Left Behind report and a lot of other really great information on agricultural systems for the purposes of feeding livestock.
And have theme parks gotten on board with this program?
That is a really great question. So I can think of one theme park that I won't name that is looking at their chain of theme parks, thinking about food sustainability and how to make the most of their food waste, both preventing it, but also making sure it's actually put to work, creating energy for them. So they have, I believe, an anaerobic digester that they're using to produce energy to power their operations. I also know of another smaller theme park that directs their food waste to feed pigs. So that's kind of a one-to-one relationship they have. It's a single historic theme park on the east coast of the U.S. that has relationships with pig farmers, and that's where they send their food. But I definitely think that there's really interesting applications for these lessons in a type of food service like a theme park, which is dispersed a lot of different types of cuisine, maybe a centralized operation that's then sending food out. So I think that's really interesting, and yes, a little bit of action from that sector as well.
Great. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'd like to leave some time to hand it back over to you for some closing comments.
Sure, I'm really happy to. I'll say first, it was great fun to have this time to chat through the program and to think through think about this topic through the lens of the folks that were joining today. I know a lot of it is focused in the private sector, so I hope it really resonated with some of the work that you all do, or at least you can think about, sitting in a hotel, restaurant, imagining what might be happening behind the scenes and some of the complex contexts that those teams are operating under. Your questions were fantastic, and I hope if any of this has inspired more curiosity, I'd be really happy to direct any additional questions to any of my colleagues. If you're interested in speaking to some of them in WWF US or in another place, another office around the world. But I also just encourage you to take a look at what exists online. I mean, I've been doing this work for 4 years, but sometimes there's so many complex systems that touch this that sometimes I just take it to YouTube, I take it to Google and start digging into a system that I don't know so much about, because it's really only by leveraging experts in other areas and joining up when we need some help and additional context that we can really solve such a large and complicated issue as something like food waste. So with that, I'll really say, I'll reiterate again, I hope that the folks on the line are safe and secure with their families and their teams during COVID, and maybe if they have the ability and interest to think about food systems a little more when they're planning travel in the coming years, or even from the notion of them going to the grocery store and making choices for themselves and their families. I hope this just added a little bit more context, and it's just the beginning of a larger conversation.
Thank you so much, Samantha. This was really interesting and inspiring, and I thank you for providing so many resources for people as well. It's very helpful. And I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, so we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.